Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you for taking time to come out on such a beautiful evening. Fun to be with you. Why don't we start with a prayer, and then we will kind of jump in from there, okay? So let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for the beautiful evening, Lord. And we come here tonight to continue to remember Francis and the gift that he was for our church. We ask you, please, to give him your peace and shower him with your mercy. We ask you, too, to especially bless the church tonight and bless the cardinals as they prepare to undertake their important responsibility for you and for the church. Bless all those in our lives who need your grace and your mercy this week. And we ask you, please, to help us be your instruments with hearts open to the promptings of your Spirit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Yes, can you hear? You can't hear? Okay, I'll turn up a little bit. I just didn't want to blast you out with the sound system. Better? Can you hear me, Hillary? Higher? Now? Better? Just make it up. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Those of you who have been with me before during presentations, you know that I do much better presentations in kind of a dialogue as opposed to just lecturing at people. So just know I feel very comfortable. If you have questions, thoughts, ideas, objections, whatever it might be, just raise your hand and I will very gladly call on you. If I'm repeating, that's just because if I'm repeating you, that's just so everybody can hear. Also, Erica has graciously agreed to be here and to record this for us. So there are some folks who couldn't make it tonight. So we're going to make it available on the website as well. Sound okay? All right, let's dive in. Fun topic tonight. So we are going to talk about to choose a pope. Welcome to, oops, got to get my thing going here. I thought it was working. Oh, I don't know. It's smarter than I am. Come on. I swear it was working.
That's my cue.
There we go. I don't know why it was stalled. Welcome to Conclave, not the movie. Glad you're here. Erica, don't go too far. Okay. How many of you actually saw or watched the movie Conclave? Okay. Just a little poll. You don't have to sort of be ashamed either way. How many of you really liked the movie? Okay. How many of you hated the movie? Okay. In between? Okay, you could be in between. All right. Those of you who liked the movie, what did you like about it? Cinematography was beautiful, yes. Entertaining. A lot of drama.
The acting was really good.
Yeah. Ralph Fiennes is really good, and I can't even remember the other actors, but they're all very good.
It seemed like it was real. Not the ending part, but
Sure.
you know, where they all come in and everything.
Okay, good. So it seemed like it had a certain dose of reality to it. Okay. Yeah, she said it seemed like it was real. The movie seemed like it was real. Mm-hmm. Authentic. Okay, good. How about those of you who did not like the movie? What did you not like about it? Yeah, Hillary.
Well, I love the ending.
Okay.
Well, big mistake.
Yeah.
The Pope does not live in the same quarters that the Cardinals live in.
Okay.
And I thought that was kind of like, well, don't we already know all this stuff? That was my take.
Okay, good. Although interestingly, this time around, I mean, Francis has lived in the same quarters where the cardinals will stay, but usually, you're right, usually the Pope does not live there. He usually lives in the Apostolic Palace, right? Good. What else? What else did you not like? Yeah. Yeah, I kind of picked it up too, Werner. Teresa and I were talking about that. It just seemed like I've never been in the Casa St. Martha where the cardinals stay, or even in the other spaces, but it seemed very cold. All stone, no warmth, no wood, nothing. It just seemed, I don't know if that was intentional or if that's really the way it is in those places. What's that? That was intentional. Ah. Yeah, even the lighting was very kind of subdued, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. I'll show my hand. I kind of felt like it was just basically taking our kind of modern Western agnostic worldview and baptizing it. We were kind of laughing because this is a movie about the church and about the election of the Pope, and they showed the Last Judgment from Michelangelo several times in the movie. Did you notice never once did they show Christ? They never focused on Christ. He didn't appear at all. I thought that's kind of strange to make a movie about a papal election and you never kind of focus on Jesus. That's a little bit strange, but anyway, it is what it is. It was certainly dramatic and fun in its own way, but not my most favorite movie in terms of enlightening people on how the process works. So hopefully we can do a little bit better job tonight. Let's talk about conclaves then and what they are. So if you were here this weekend, you heard me talk a little bit about this. Conclave is a gathering of all the world's, not bishops, but cardinals, right, who come together to elect a pope, right? So it comes from the Latin word conclave, which means with the key. And we'll talk about that again in a few minutes. That's different than a consistory, which is where the pope gathers together the cardinals in order to advise him on an issue or to make new cardinals, okay? So conclaves happen much, much less frequently, and that's what we have now. So, come on. Oh, yes. There we go. So one thing that I think the movie can kind of help us to remember is this is a very human process, right? It's a very human process. But, as Catholics, we also believe that the Holy Spirit works through the conclave process. And that's important not to leave that out. I mean, there's no doubt that historically there have been times where human foibles and politics and whatnot get too involved. I mean, there have been times historically, especially back in the first millennium, where Roman noble families controlled the papacy, where conclaves ended up in basically fistfights and sword fights, and they had to call in, the Roman emperor's soldiers to kind of, restore some order to things. It was kind of nasty, right? And thankfully, we've kind of moved away from there. But I think certainly we can say in the modern period, ever since, the ending of maybe like the Papal States, the 19th century, early mid-19th century, when the Pope's secular power was taken away, which the church kind of really resisted, to be honest. But I think in the end, we've seen what a blessing that is for the church to have that independence from secular power, right? And certainly since that time, I think the cardinals have really focused on their responsibility before God to try and choose the best shepherd they can for the church, okay? So that's what this whole process is. So let's walk through what happens kind of from the beginning, from the death of a pope, on into the actual process of the election itself, okay? So the death of the old pope here. So when the old pope dies, there is an official who just happens to be an American right now, an American cardinal, who kind of steps to the front for the first part of this whole process, and he is called the Camerlengo, right? Or the Chamberlain, the papal Chamberlain, okay? And on the outline there, I kind of reversed his duties a little bit because really the first thing he does is when the Pope dies, he is the one responsible for verifying that the Pope is really dead, right? So in the old days, anybody know how they used to do this to make sure the Pope was really dead? They whacked him with a hammer on the head. Because it's very bad form to bury a Pope alive. That generally does not go well. So they didn't whack him, they just tapped him on the forehead. But that was a way that they just ensured. And then they would cover his face with a sheet. They would call him by his Christian name 3 times. And actually, that is something that I think is still done. They will still say, so for example, with Pope Francis, the Chamberlain would have said, Jorge, 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 right? So they call him by his Christian name, and that is, if he doesn't respond to that, that kind of signifies that he really is dead. Now today, of course, they would use modern medical equipment, right? They would use whatever, heartbeat, EKG, however else we would kind of confirm that a person really has died, okay? Questions on that? Okay, all right. So no more hammers today. Then it's the job of the Camerlengo to start the communication process. So he alerts the Vicar of Rome, okay? So the Pope is the bishop of what, first and foremost? He's the Bishop of Rome, right? Obviously, he has a lot of responsibility as pastor of the Universal Church. So he can't always attend to the day-to-day running of the Diocese of Rome. So he appoints a vicar, okay, the cardinal vicar. And I can't remember what his name is right now. You can look it up. But anyway, so he alerts the vicar of Rome, who alerts the people of Rome. And then he also alerts the dean of the College of Cardinals, okay? So the cardinals, there are 200 and some cardinals right now. There are about 135 who are still eligible to vote because they're not 80 years old or older, okay? So the dean is the senior most, we'll talk about this in a second, he's the senior most cardinal bishop, okay? So there are 3 ranks of cardinals, which is a little bit confusing. So you can be a cardinal bishop, you can be a cardinal priest, or you can be a cardinal deacon, okay? Now in the old days, there really were deacons and priests and bishops who were cardinals, okay? And certainly in the modern period, all of that has changed. So now you have, if you're going to be a cardinal, for the most part, you have to be a bishop, or you have to be able to be made to be a bishop, okay? But they still retain, for the sake of kind of tradition, those 3 ranks of bishops, priests, and of course, most important of all, the deacons, okay? So the cardinal bishops, they come from the surrounding dioceses around Rome. So they're the traditional dioceses. They call them suffragan dioceses, those that were subject to Roman, to the authority of the Bishop of Rome, okay? And then cardinal priests, today, actually I should back up just a second. Today, they tend to be very senior curial officials. So the head of the Department of State and the head of the DDF, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and other senior curial officials, those tend to be the cardinal bishops today, okay? So cardinal priests, the next layer down, those tend to be, for the most part, they tend to be diocesan bishops around the world, okay? So most of the American cardinals would be cardinal priests, okay? There's a few curial officials who get mixed in there as well. And then finally, the cardinal deacons, for them, for the most part, they tend to be actually people who also work in the curia, okay? So the curia is kind of like the Pope's, it's more than a cabinet, it's kind of his executive staff. They're the ones who kind of help him with the business of running the church. Does that make sense? So the bishops, the cardinal bishops, they elect from their number. Every 5 years, they elect a new dean. So it's the person who he has some ceremonial responsibilities, and at a time of a conclave, he has responsibility for actually running the conclave itself, okay? So when a pope dies, he is the one who then begins to communicate that to the diplomatic corps, and he communicates it to the cardinals, and it goes out to the press and goes out to the world, okay? So that's how that whole process gets started. Make sense? Yeah, Yonki.
How many cardinals from the U.S.?
How many cardinals from the U.S.? I want to say there are currently I might have this wrong, but I think there are 14 living cardinals. I don't remember how many are still eligible to vote. Is it 17? Is it 17? Okay, so good. Thank you. So there are 17 living cardinals, 10 are eligible to vote. Okay, good question. Yeah.
Just curious, the way of them communicating it to the public internally as well. Is it a process of, okay, it's communicated that he's died internally, and then somebody communicates that to the external world?
Yeah, that was the idea, and that's how it worked for centuries. I mean, to be honest, today, once word starts getting out, I mean, the press gets hold of it very quickly, and a lot of even bishops, cardinals, and whatnot, they find out through the press just like we do. Yeah, it's just kind of the way that communication has changed. Yeah. So, by the way, when the Pope dies, most popes are buried in St. Peter's. Those of you who have been there, you'll recognize this is kind of St. Peter's. So if you go down, this is the main level of St. Peter's. If you go down a level, there are what are called the Vatican grottos. And they're not all the popes, but many, many of the popes are buried there. So that's where, for example, Pope Benedict is buried. This is his tomb, which incidentally was originally the tomb of Pope John Paul II. Okay, but that opened up when Pope John Paul II, when he was canonized, he was moved upstairs. So he is buried now underneath the altar here. I can't remember what the name of this chapel is. I should know because I almost got kicked out of St. Peter's here. I should let Teresa tell this story, but I won't because she'll enhance. So we were there on a Saturday night, and we wanted to kind of make our way around, and we knew that John Paul was here, so we wanted to go pray. So we went to pray, and they take very seriously reverence in the Roman basilicas. So they don't like it when you're kind of walking around taking lots of pictures. But they know people are going to take pictures, so they designated a section for people who wanted to pray, and they designated a section for people who wanted to take pictures. And the people who wanted to pray got to sit closer. Right? So we went and we prayed. We prayed for about 10 minutes. And then it was, I wanted to kind of continue my way around. But I thought, gosh, this is a great picture. So I pulled out my phone. I snapped the picture. No sooner did I snap a picture than it wasn't, I don't think it was really the Swiss Guard, but the officials were on me. So, and Teresa moved about 3 seats away from me. So. Anyway, so that's where they're buried. Francis, anybody remember where Francis was buried? Go ahead, Erica. St. Mary Major, right, St. Mary Major. That's one of the 4 major papal basilicas. So that was a favorite church of his. There is a famous icon there of the Blessed Mother called Mary, either Help of the Roman People or Mary, Salvation of the Roman People. It can be translated either way. But he always went there before and after every trip he took to pray before that icon and ask for the Blessed Mother, her help and her intercession. So that's where he wanted to be buried. And there are, I think, 6 or 7 other popes who are buried there as well. So he's in a what?
Broom closet.
A broom closet?
A broom closet.
Did it really? I didn't know that. Tony says that the space where they actually made his tomb used to be a broom closet. I didn't know that. Okay. It looks very nice now. They did a really, really, really wonderful job. Yeah. Okay, so back to the Camerlengo just for a second here. So after communicating the news of the Pope's death, he has other responsibilities. So he's the one who's charged with getting this whole process of planning for the Pope's funeral started. Okay, so he takes a lead in that. He works with the senior cardinals to do that. He also has responsibility for kind of safeguarding and administering the goods and the property of the papal household and the church, the Vatican at that time. So among other things, what he does is he seals the papal apartment. You may have seen that online or on the news, right, where he actually tied the doors shut and then seals it with wax, right, so nobody can go in. And then he destroys the papal ring and he destroys the papal seal. Why do you think that is? Yeah, they're very concerned about forgeries, right? They don't want anybody to produce a document and say, oh, but look at this, I have this official document from the Pope that says that, Yonke is actually, I appointed a cardinal and he can come into the thing, to the conclave and vote, right? So they're very careful about that. So they destroy the ring and they destroy the seal, okay? The reason they seal the room in the old days, human beings being human beings, something that would happen if the rooms were not sealed shut, then what would happen is people would come in and they would do what, would you guess? Souvenir hunt. They would souvenir hunt, right? Today, popes are more concerned about their papers, their important papers and whatnot. They want to make sure those are kept intact and, for the accuracy of, history and the good of the church, okay? So that's one thing the Pope, the papal chamberlain does, the Camerlengo. The other thing he does is as things get rolling, as cardinals start to show up in Rome, each day they meet in what's called a general congregation. So all cardinals who are present meet every day, starting, the day after the Pope dies, at least as many who can get there. And then that first week or so, as they are planning for the papal funeral, that's mostly what they're focused on taking care of. So when the Pope dies, governance of the church goes to the College of Cardinals, right? They're responsible for running the church while there is no Pope, during the sede vacante period, if you say it that way. Sede vacante is a Latin word that means the chair is empty. So the chair of the Pope is empty. So the cardinals take over responsibility for running the church, and that first week or so, they're mostly focused just on trying to plan for the funeral, setting the date, who's going to preach, who's going to do this, that, and the other thing, right? They're very careful not to get too much into discussions about what should we be thinking about for our next pope, or what does the church need? Why do you think they're careful about that for that first week, would you guess? Okay, respect for the Pope is one, for sure. It's not like they just want to, brush him aside. But there's another reason, actually, a very practical reason. Rose? all the cardinals have not arrived yet, right? All the cardinals have not arrived yet. So there's very much a concern during this period that nobody gain undue influence or power. And in fact, there was one news story that was a big concern that the cardinals were starting to meet even as soon as they did, which I think was maybe 2 days after the death of Francis, because again, they're worried about discussions that might be happening without all the cardinals present, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think when the Pope was sick,
Yeah.
and, even if one of the cardinals is not there, and we can assume that they communicate among them every time.
Right.
So even if I'm not in Rome, if I want to talk about the succession of the Pope, I can always communicate with someone. So why is this?
Yeah, there's just
The question was because say other cardinals are not yet in Rome. They are not yet in Rome. If I'm not in Rome, but I can communicate with people who are in Rome, and then we can still discuss about the process.
Yeah.
One who we're gonna choose, we can discuss about it.
Yeah. So he's saying that today especially, even if a cardinal is not in Rome, we have modern communication methods where a person can talk by phone or can email or Zoom or whatever. Why is there all this concern? Because it seems like it's possible for somebody not to be left out of the communication. I think they could certainly be updated. They may even be able to sort of say, yes, I'd like to have you say this on my behalf, but there's still something about the actual dialogue process, the back and forth, that's important. It's not just the information. It's not just that they might miss out on information. Again, they're very sensitive to somebody emerging and gaining influence before everybody has a chance to get there, right? So even now you're kind of, the press kind of has its own candidates that it's betting on already, right? But the cardinals too are watching each other. And particularly today where the college is so international, they really don't know each other very well. Right? So they're watching very closely. Every time somebody stands up to make a speech, every time somebody asks a question, anytime somebody takes responsibility for something, they're watching all of this because they're trying to figure out, what do I think of this guy? Would he be good for the church? Would I trust him with leadership? How does he seem to handle himself, right? So there's just, again, that concern about who might be gaining an advantage, I think is the main thing. Yeah, Rose?
Following up on that,
Yeah.
now that we are kind of a global world and new technology and so forth, how often do the cardinals interact between themselves beside when they're
It's one of the challenges today. So it used to be when the college was more prominently European and even Italian, they would see each other quite a lot. Right? Because they would be gathering for things like, consistories quite frequently, and there was other church business that they were kind of meeting for. Today, it's much harder because cardinals come from all over the world. So what it does, some people think it tends to give the Italians an advantage, especially those who work in the Curia. Maybe I should say it that way, because not all curial cardinals are Italian, but curial cardinals an advantage because every bishop has to go to Rome once every 3 years for what's called an ad limina visit, right? So when you go for your ad limina visit to meet with the Pope, you also visit the heads of the different dicasteries, the different kind of conferences or departments in the Vatican. And so you would get to know some of the cardinals who lead those different dicasteries, okay? So those cardinals tend to be a little bit better known. But otherwise, there's a lot of cardinals who really don't know their brother cardinals very well. So this interim period is really important for them. Yeah, good question. Okay. Just really quickly, as the process begins to go forward, obviously the work of the church can't grind to a complete halt. However, one of the things that's an interesting challenge is when the Pope dies, every head of a congregation or a dicastery in the Vatican, as soon as the Pope dies, they lose their job, right? They are out of a job. Now, most of them are reappointed at least temporarily when the new Pope is elected, okay? But the new Pope is free to dismiss them or retain them as he will, okay? While there is no Pope, there are no heads of the congregations. So instead what happens is the work of those congregations or those dicasteries, those departments, continues under the leadership of the second in command, sort of the secretary, and they are not allowed to make any sort of major decisions. Anything that, a future pope might want to have some input on or be able to say yes or no to, okay? So they have to kind of just deal with very daily, sort of basic, mundane kinds of things, okay? There are some exceptions. There are 3 cardinals who don't lose their jobs. One we've already talked about, Cameron Lango, because he's kind of got to get the ball rolling here. The other one is the vicar of the Diocese of Rome. Obviously, he needs to keep his job because the Diocese of Rome has to keep running, just like any other diocese. And then finally, the last one, and I'm going to say this and I'll take it back, the major penitentiary. So he is the cardinal who is responsible for confessional matters that are reserved to the Holy See. So, somebody who desecrates the Eucharist, somebody who assaults a pope, somebody who, I don't know, there's like 4 or 5 or 6 major kinds of really serious things you can do that if you do them, you can't just go to confession, right? You have to actually appeal to Rome to receive forgiveness and reconciliation for those. And since the door of mercy must always remain open, okay, that cardinal, he's called the major penitentiary, he remains in place even during the sede vacante period, okay? Now, I'm going to add to that because I just learned something the other day. There is actually one other figure, and I don't know if this is new with Francis, but there's called the papal almoner. He is the one who is responsible for distributing those funds which have been given to the Pope to help people in need throughout the world. He remains in place as well, so that he can continue to administer aid and help to people who need that. Okay? Questions on any of that or thoughts? Okay. Yeah. Yes, it is the year of Jubilee. Vatican City is not closed. You can still go. There are places that you probably cannot see right now. So, for example, I'm dead sure you cannot go into the Sistine right now. They're preparing that for the conclave. You probably cannot get anywhere near the Apostolic Palace. You can actually get into Mary Major, St. Mary Major now. There are people there who are visiting the tomb of Pope Francis. There may be a couple of other sensitive locations that you may not have access to, but it is open. It is open. Yeah. Great question. Yeah, because there are people there right now. What was supposed to happen, 2 major things were supposed to happen this month. One is there was a gathering during the Jubilee year for people with disabilities, and especially young people. And so all these families had these plans to travel to Rome for this, and then Francis died. Well, a lot of them still went, and apparently they're having a great experience, although obviously there's the sense of something missing. They're not able to meet with the Pope as they hoped, right? The other one is the canonization of Blessed Carlo Acutis. He was approved for canonization by Pope Francis. That was supposed to happen later this month. Obviously, that'll have to be put off. When is it?
It was this past Sunday.
Was it this past Sunday?
Yeah, and the Jubilee for the youth specifically was happening, and so they all, and that's what they're saying, most of them still came and then were present at the funeral.
Great. So Erica was saying that the Carlos Acutis' canonization was supposed to happen this past Sunday, and obviously that could not because the canonization has to be done by the Pope, right? So they're going to hold that one off. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. Let's see. Just one other word, just quickly on general congregations. This is kind of interesting. It kind of came up in the movie. The cardinals, as they meet every day to take care of the business of the church, they are really restricted in what they can and cannot do. So they cannot make any decisions that would change papal election rules, right, for obvious reasons. They also cannot appoint new cardinals. They can't make any decisions that would be binding on a new pope, okay? So there's all these protections in place so that they don't try and sort of encroach on the prerogatives and the responsibilities of the Holy Father, okay? Well, for example, one thing that happened, this whole thing about in the movie, this cardinal who is appointed in pectore. So an in pectore cardinal is somebody that the Pope appoints to be a cardinal, but he never proclaims it publicly. That is a real thing. That does happen, right? So maybe a person lives in a part of the world where if it were known that he were a cardinal, that might put him in mortal danger. Or there might be other political considerations, right? So that's a real thing. But an in pectore cardinal cannot show up at a conclave. unless he has been publicly announced, proclaimed by the Pope prior to his death. Okay, so he can't just show up. That's obviously just to protect the integrity of the conclave. So not just anybody can show up and say, hey, I've got a letter here showing that, Pope Francis appointed me cardinal, right? So again, lots of protections in place. I think that's all I'm going to say on that, that section. Let's actually talk about the conclave itself. So where did I put my little clicky? Oh, there it is. All right. So the conclave. All right, so this is kind of a cool map. I don't know if you can see this very well, but I thought this was kind of a cool little picture here. So this is a picture of St. Peter's and St. Peter's Square. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to point out to you some of the major places where things happen. So this is the Basilica of St. Peter. If you've ever been to Rome or to the Vatican, that's the church. Okay, this is the famous square by Bernini. You can see kind of the famous colonnades here, and it's truly a stunning place to be. So right over here is a little residence. It's not a little residence. It's like the papal or the Vatican guest house. It's really a hotel is what it is. And this is where important officials come when they come to visit the Vatican. So bishops who are going to visit Rome for their ad limina visits, a lot of them would stay here. It's called the Casa Santa Martha. My Italian sucks. I'm just going to say the House of St. Martha. Okay. So that's where they would stay, although like for our North American bishops, a lot of them would stay in the North American College, which is not too far away. But this is kind of a main guest house, and this is where the cardinals stay during the conclave, okay? So they are given quarters here, and they are, the house is basically sealed off, cordoned off. Nobody else can get in except those who need to obviously kind of take care of the cardinals, feed them, right? Clean the rooms, all that other stuff, okay? So that's right here. And then the Sistine Chapel is kind of over in this area here. So it's on the other side here, and it's not super visible from the square. You can just see the roof. I'll show you a picture in a second. And you can see the chimney where the smoke comes up. But it's interesting, so when the cardinals are meeting, they cordon off the residence there, and they cordon off the Sistine Chapel. And when they're kind of going back and forth between the chapel and the residence, they kind of go around the back here. This is where the public does not have access. You can see that yellow path. So they have to walk around there so that nobody can kind of accost them along the way or slip them a 20 or whatever it might be, okay? So those are kind of the places where things actually happen, okay? Yeah.
Are they cut off from, or do they have to give up like their phones and stuff, so they're cut off completely from internet and
Yes.
and everything?
Everything. So they cannot bring computers in with them. They cannot bring cell phones in. They cannot bring any kind of communication equipment. They can't receive newspapers. Nothing like that. So they are supposed to be sequestered from all outside communication, right? Yeah, Beth. They each have their own room. They each have their own room. In the old days, they would set up residences. This is the Apostolic Palace, where popes usually live. Francis chose to make his residence here in the House of St. Martha. The reason he did that, part of it was his simplicity, but the major reason he said in an interview was for his own psychology. He just said he needed to be around people, and he thought the Apostolic Palace would be too isolating. If he wasn't around people, he just didn't think he would do very well. So it used to be that they would set up little cubicles, literally cubicles in the Apostolic Palace, and that's where the cardinals would stay. And part of that was to encourage the cardinals to get things moving along here and make a decision, right? Because the quarters they were staying in were not exactly comfortable, okay? That's very true. Then, I don't know what it is. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was the early mid-20th century to decide, okay, well, maybe we'll let them stay in the hotel.
Make sure they put nails on it.
Yeah, something. Go, Connie. Good question. So Colleen asked a great question. What about the cardinals who are too old to vote? Do they stay here as well? So they can stay until the actual conclave starts, until the election process starts. Once that starts, they have to leave. Yeah, because they don't let the cardinals who are voting, the voting, how would I say that, the electors, they don't let them interact with anybody else, okay? So in the old days, there was this concern. If you were here this weekend, you heard me tell my story about the two conclaves back in the 13th century, the one that went 1.5 years and the other that went 3 years, right? That's originally where the word conclave came from, because in the first case, they locked the cardinals up, they took away the key, and they told them, you will not come out until you make a decision, okay? In the second case, they did that, and then the cardinals still didn't come to a decision, so they tore the roof off the building, and then they put them on a diet of bread and water, right? And were able to convince them that way to come to a decision speedily, please. So, in the old days, there was this concern to kind of lock up the cardinals, to try and, to isolate them, to encourage them to make a decision. As time went on, what happened was the concern wasn't so much that. The concern was to protect their vote from outside influence. So you may know this if you know your history, especially in Europe. Lots of secular powers had influence in papal elections. For a time, there were several monarchies which could veto a papal election. If they didn't like the choice, they could veto it. There were certainly Roman families and Italian families, the Medicis up in Florence, who had just a hands on the scale, if I can say it that way. So over time, what happened was the church worked to sort of isolate the cardinals from these outside influences. And even today, if you read the rules around papal elections, you see that that is one of the most serious offenses that a cardinal can commit, is to allow an outside secular power to influence their vote, right? That is, if my memory is correct, that is a excommunication late sententia, is what the phrase is. That means just automatically, if you do that, you are excommunicated, okay? So they take that very seriously, okay? Did that answer the question? Okay. Yeah, Rose.
The cardinals can vote or have to be under 80.
Yes.
So, that's a modern thing. They live there.
Right.
Do they update the rules of this?
Yeah. Every so often, like John Paul revised the voting rules a little bit. Benedict went back and changed something that John Paul had done. So Rose's question, if you didn't hear, is do they ever update the rules around voting? She was asking specifically around the age limit of 80. So to be eligible to vote as a cardinal, you must be under the age of 80 on the day the Pope dies. So you can turn 80 during the conclave, but you must be under 80 on the day the Pope dies, if that makes sense. Yes, that is a more modern rule. I can't remember which Pope put that in place, but it wasn't that long ago, where one of the, I don't know if it was Pius XII, one of the more modern popes put that rule in place.
So the piece of that is that when they also said that a pope can retire at 80?
There actually, that one, it'd be really interesting to ask a canon lawyer. There really is not a provision that I remember that explicitly talks about a pope being eligible to retire. So bishops have to submit their resignation, I think it's at 75. The pope doesn't have to accept it, but they must submit their resignation at 75. Popes, there is no such requirement. In fact, the general understanding is that a pope is pope until he dies. So what Benedict did was, it's not exactly an innovation. There was a pope before him that did that. But that's not, I don't think you'll find that anywhere in canon law, is my recollection. The question somebody else asked, why the age limit of 80? It's a great question. I don't know for sure, but this is my suspicion. So as cardinals start living longer, okay, you may have situations like, for example, we said the United States has 17 cardinals. Is that what we said? So something like 17 and 10 that can vote. So if you have a lot of cardinals, older cardinals around who are no longer kind of active but can still vote, that might give undue influence, even more influence to certain parts of the world or certain countries, right? So instead of the United States having just 10 electors, now they might have 17, right? Italy would probably have, 40 electors versus, right now I think they are at 14 or 15 is my recollection. Yeah. Yes. Just like a bishop, they are bishops, right? So they submit their letter of resignation at 75, okay? Again, the bishop does not have to accept it. The Pope does not have to accept it. Okay, and then curial officials, I think if you're a curial official, you're required to submit your resignation. I believe that's also 80, but I might have that wrong. And again, the Pope can either decide to accept or not. Yeah. Yeah, Yankee.
So, Brett, the cardinal itself is the candidate to be a pope?
So cardinals are what they're. Yankee asked the question, what actually is a cardinal? So originally what cardinals were they were important officials in the Roman Church who were appointed by the Pope to be his personal advisors, okay? Gradually, as sort of these Roman families and these political officials started getting too much influence in papal elections, the Diocese of Rome and the Pope decided it would be better if we have, rather than just have the people, because that's the way it used to be done, rather than having the people appoint the Bishop of Rome, okay, they were going to have just the cardinals start to select the Pope, okay? So the cardinals were the Pope's chosen advisors who also had the responsibility then of voting for the new Pope. Initially, the Pope was always chosen from the rank of either priests or deacons, right? Because the understanding was that bishops should be more or less married to their diocese. So not like in the modern period where you might find bishops moving around. That didn't happen in the early part of the church. So instead, all new popes were usually either priests or deacons who then were ordained bishop and then became pope, if that makes sense.
So the candidate is outside the cardinal or
In the old days, it could be either. There were often popes who came from outside the college. Today, it's been a long, long time since anybody has been chosen pope who has not been a member of the College of Cardinals. Yeah, so today it almost always comes from the College of Cardinals. Yeah, I can't remember the last time it was different. But still, the requirement remains. The only requirements to be pope are that you have to be a baptized male, Catholic, ordainable. That's the only requirements, basically. You have to be ordainable. Yeah, Rose.
What is the difference between a bishop and a cardinal? Is a cardinal just like a name, thing, or is it different in power?
So it's both. So a cardinal is generally a bishop, just like a bishop. So, Archbishop Sample is an archbishop. A lot of the cardinals are archbishops. So there's no difference in sort of sacramental order, if I can say it that way. Cardinals, though, as personal advisors to the Pope and voters in papal elections, they have special, let's say, influence and dignity and standing. So deference would be paid to them. So, for example, in the national conferences, so like in the Conference of American Bishops, the cardinals, if they stand up to speak, special probably weight would be given to what they say. It doesn't mean all the bishops will agree with them, but they certainly would listen with maybe a little bit more intentionality, just because, usually the cardinals are in conversation with the Vatican and the Pope and whatnot. So does that make sense or not yet? It's really kind of more of it's an honor, but it's more than an honor. They don't, like, a cardinal can't come and start telling Archbishop Sample how to run the Archdiocese of Portland, right? It's not sort of what do they call that in the military? Chain of command or rank. It's not like a cardinal has more, outranks officially a bishop. They're all bishops, okay? But in influence, a cardinal definitely has more influence, for sure, okay? Make sense?
I don't understand how all these cardinals learn the qualifications to vote. You said the Italians kind of know each other.
Yeah.
If there's 135, how do they know the cardinal from Arizona or wherever? They don't have qualifications.
Yeah, so again, that's why, so the consistories are really important, where those more regular meetings where cardinals are coming together. Again, Teresa, do you mind if I tell this story? So my wife's uncle was a cardinal, and so I remember conversations with him, and he said that anytime that the cardinals got together, he was always sort of sizing up his brother cardinals. What do I think of this guy? Do I think he would be a good leader? Do I think he has the qualities that I think are needed, would be needed to be Pope, right? So they're always sizing each other up at those opportunities, right? During the interregnum period, this period right now, they're sizing each other up. They're paying attention to what a cardinal might say that makes it into the press. Interventions they might make at the synod and on synodality, or just other times where they might speak or make a decision or be in the news. They're always kind of doing that with, in the back of their mind, an eye towards, what do I think of this guy? Does that make sense? Yeah.
So do they have like your picture and then a bio of Cardinal to look at?
I don't know if the Cardinals, it's online. There are certainly websites like that. They'll list the Cardinals. They'll kind of give you a little bit of a bio. What's that?
They're not allowed to use the internet right now.
They're not allowed to use it while they're in the conclave. No, not while they're in the conclave. Yeah.
Know somebody they can look at?
Yeah, not electronically. They probably have to ask their brother cardinals. Yes.
How about the challenges that the world is facing, or the church, Catholic Church is facing?
Yes.
I would choose a cardinal also based on that.
Yes.
We have the world, for example, now we have war here, war there,
Yep.
and we have a lot of challenges around the world.
Yes. Those are really important. So the question is, what about the challenges of the world? How much should those figure into the discussions of the cardinals? Very much so. Very much so. So, this is kind of one of those things where we can kind of get blinders on. In the American church, we have certain issues that we think are most important. But for example, if you go to the Middle East or to Africa or to Asia or someplace like that, they might be focusing on very different questions, right? Maybe they're thinking about questions around poverty or war or violence or whatever, right? The persecution, there are still many, many churches, Catholic churches around the world, Catholic communities, let me say it that way, that are actively being persecuted. That might be what's looming largest on their minds, right? So we have to be careful not to get so narrow in our view of the universal church that we think that just because it's important to us as Americans, that that's what's important to our brother and sister Catholics around the world. But those are very important in the discussions, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Their track record's already being judged. In Canada, the cardinal from the Philippines
Yes,
who got written up recently,
yes,
and criticism that he didn't speak out enough against Duarte and his persecution of his fellow citizens. That's being kind of discussed in the media as if, their track record
right,
on either global issues or local political issues
yeah.
is part of this decision-making process. And I've been curious about the politics, like the fellow cardinals say, yeah, you didn't do enough.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a good observation. So, the point is that, for example, Cardinal, I don't know how he pronounces his name. Is it Tagle? Yeah, Tagle?
Luis Antonio
Tagle. So he's been in the news, and there's been some criticism of him that he did not speak up enough in his kind of political context. So I think, other cardinals are aware of that, but I think this is also one of those things where cardinals, you don't get to be cardinal without having a bit of savvy and awareness of the world. So I think they also, they're not going to, I don't mean to be critical here, but I think our press, especially in the West, sometimes our analysis is so superficial. And I think the cardinals are aware that there is often other things at play and there are other considerations. It's kind of like, you remember when Pius XII came under all this fire that he didn't do enough for the Jewish people during World War II. And then, as we continued to do research on this, we found out, wait a minute, he did a lot more than people realize, and there were reasons that he couldn't do some of the things that people thought he should do. Doesn't mean he didn't make mistakes. He may have, right? But again, we have to be careful with some of that, and I think cardinals are aware of that. Yeah. Yes? No.
Pope, you shouldn't be Pope.
Yeah. There actually is an old Roman kind of proverb, which is, he who goes into a conclave a pope comes out a cardinal. Comes out a cardinal. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can't imagine the responsibility that a pope carries, not to mention the schedule. It's grueling. I read interviews with John Paul and Benedict both. I mean, I don't know how they did it. I mean, I was half their age. If that, I couldn't do what they did. Ann? Yes, you can say no. If you are selected, if you are elected, if you get 2/3 of the votes, the Cardinal Dean comes to you and says, do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church? And he can either say, yes, I accept, or he can say no. And there have been actually at least 2 men in history who have said no, and they were both saints. So Robert Bellarmine is one, and I'm going to forget the other one. But yes, you can say no. Yes.
And I think that if they say yes, it's not because they want the power.
Right.
They want the lot. I think it's more because they trust their colleagues, and they say that their colleagues think that I can do the job, and it's for the interest of the church.
Yeah.
If the majority of the colleagues think so I have to accept.
Yeah.
It's not because I want to be, the Pope.
Right.
Most of the time, no one want to be the Pope.
Right.
They don't want-
I read an article with one of the Papabile today. I can't remember if it was if it was Cardinal Pizzabale or if it was Taglier, or it was supposedly one of the leading candidates. I mean, who knows? But he was saying exactly that. He was saying, there's very few cardinals who actually, if any, who want to be Pope. But if 2/3 of your brothers have kind of prayed about this and thought about this and evaluated this and have come to the decision that you would be the best candidate, and they come and they ask you to do it, he says, unless there is some reason where you cannot do the job, he says you are almost bound to say yes, just in obedience. And then you just trust that God is working through that process and will give you what you need to lead the church.
I think it was Saint Philip Benizi.
Benizi was the other one said no.
He actually hid from.
Oh, did he hide? I did not know that. Okay, I did not know that. Okay. Okay, so we talked about number 5. Let's move our little... Thank you, Tony. I'm a mess. Thank you. So I just wanted you to see, this is another view. No, I can't see. So this is as if you're standing down in St. Peter's Square. This is the corner of St. Peter's Basilica. And this building right back here that you can just see a little bit of, that is actually the Sistine Chapel. That's the roof of the Sistine. So, and there's a little chimney that they mount on the corner here during papal elections, and that's where the smoke comes up. Okay? So the Sistine is kind of hidden back away. Smoke doesn't come up from St. Peter's. It's actually from the chapel and back there. Okay? Okay, so the cardinals. Kelsey put this together for me. These are just kind of cardinals who've been mentioned in the news as possibilities. So you can see Cardinal Parolin. He is the Vatican Secretary of State, or was until Francis died. He was a close collaborator with Francis, so some people think he would be a force for stability if they were to choose him. Here is the cardinal from the Philippines, Cardinal Taglier, who is seen very much as in the mold of Francis, very much motivated by social justice issues, very much open to engagement with the world, accompaniment, and whatnot, and seems to be very popular with young people as well. So some people really, really like him. This is Cardinal Pizzabale, who's been mentioned apparently a lot online and in the press, but not so much, from what I read today, not so much yet, at least amongst the cardinals. So he's a really interesting guy. He is from Italy. He's from the same place where John the 23rd came from. But he's been in the Holy Land as the Latin Patriarch there and has been able to have significant influence and make friendships on both sides of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians there. He's highly, highly respected. He was the one who, after the October 7th massacre last year, he was both critical of the Israeli response, but he was also the one who said, I will offer my life in exchange for the Jewish hostages. Yeah, so quite an impressive guy. We were laughing in the office yesterday because his name, Pizzabale, literally means pizza dance. So how would it be to have Pope pizza dance? Pizza dance. So I don't know what a pizza dance would be. Yes, he would not be known as Pope Pizza Dance. But it'll be fun. Not to, yes. Yes, he's actually a very, very impressive guy. And then this is the Cardinal, is it Busungo? Yeah, he's from the Congo, and he is very much motivated by issues of economic justice and peace and violence and some of the political problems that are facing his country. And apparently he has been quite influential there. It makes me wonder if they would want to have him leave that position because he's been so effective where he is in a part of the world that is, I don't know that much about the Congo, but I know it is a country just hugely in need of quality leaders, and he is a quality leader. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. Now, these are just four that the Western news have kind of keyed onto. This guy up here, he's also an Italian that's been mentioned, and I can't remember his name. Zuppi, you are, good job. Yes, he's also been mentioned. The reality is we don't know. So the Cardinals aren't thinking about all the same things that necessarily we are, but these are just some of the candidates that are possibilities. Every once in a while, Cardinal Burke gets mentioned, but I think he's just way too... I just don't think he has the influence and frankly, the gifts to lead the universal church. I don't think he'd be a very serious candidate. There was some talk actually with Cardinal George. Cardinal George was bishop here, archbishop here, you may remember. There was some talk at one time that he might have possibilities, but of course he died now. Again, just the qualifications to vote. You have to be under 80 years of age on the day the Pope dies. You must swear absolute and perpetual secrecy about papal elections. Now, it's funny because different cardinals seem to sort of interpret that differently. So some feel free once the election is done, or especially after a few years have passed, they feel more free to talk about what happened during the process. Others take this very seriously, and they never talk about what happened during the process. By law, the number of electors is limited to 120, but at least the last three, if not the last four popes, have all exceeded that. So part of the challenge is you've got cardinal, by the time you get to be cardinal, usually you are a little bit more senior. So you've got cardinals who are aging out all the time, right? And the popes are trying to keep the numbers up a little bit for the sake of the election. So inevitably you run into situations where you have more than 120 electors. And right now, I think the number's at 135. Cynthia?
Is that then intended now as more of a limit of a minimum of 120?
No, it's supposed to be a maximum, but there's nothing, the Pope is free to do as he wishes. It's not binding on him.
So it is that they will push it down at least a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, Hillary? There's 133 now. Okay, I had heard one was ill. I didn't hear about the second one. That's interesting. Okay. We already talked about this. If a cardinals in pectore may not vote unless they're made public before the Pope dies. And today, as we've talked about, the college is as international as it's ever been. 19% Italian. I was wrong on that. Okay. Okay. The election itself. Let's talk about the election. So this is where the election itself happens. This is this interior of the Sistine Chapel. Obviously, it looks a little different when there's not an election going on here. This is Michelangelo's famous Last Judgment scene. Not scene. What's the word for it? Fresco. So, but this is where the cardinals come. And interestingly, there is no discussion or politicking or anything like that that is allowed while you're in the chapel. The only thing the cardinals can do when they're in the chapel is pray and vote, okay? So any discussions or politicking or anything like that, that has to go on outside the chapel. So they do that over dinner, after dinner, early in the morning, whenever it might be, okay? So the morning of the first day of the conclave, they will all gather for Mass together, and then they will proceed over to the Sistine Chapel, and there they will take their oaths, right? Promising to uphold the rules for papal elections, okay? In the old days, the election did not have to happen in the Sistine, but today, all elections must happen there, okay? After they've taken their oaths of secrecy, the Master of Liturgical Ceremonies, I think is his title, he's a Vatican official, he says the words extra omnes, which means all out. And at that point, everybody who is not an elector, there's a few exceptions, but basically anybody who is not an elector must leave the Sistine Chapel and must leave what would they call that, the cordon of the conclave. So they're not allowed in the Sistine Chapel. They're not allowed in the residence or any place like that. Okay, make sense? Okay.
Does Carmelingo stay?
Camerlengo stays unless he's too old. We have a really interesting situation this year. So the dean of the college, Cardinal Bautista Rey, and the vice dean, who I can't remember his name right now. Help me out. I don't know his name either. I've forgotten. But anyway, they are both too old. So neither one of them can vote. So neither one of them will be allowed to stay in the conclave. So the most senior cardinal bishop, he will be the one who will lead things this year. Okay. Yeah.
You said that no speeches or anything can go on in the Sistine Chapel.
Nope.
Dinners and stuff, so, I mean, you've got 135 guys having dinner. Where do they do that?
Yeah, they do that either in the Apostolic Palace or they do that over in the residence where they are staying.
Do they always stay as a group?
Yep, pretty much they're together. Except when they're in their rooms in the evenings, or they can get into smaller groups. There's times to get there's places that they can kind of gather that are closed off to the public and closed off to everybody else. Yeah. Yeah, there might be speeches or reflections or whatever that are offered in the Sistine, but you can't actively politic there. So you can't say, Rose, if you give Dave your vote, then I'll give you this or whatever. That kind of thing isn't allowed anyway. But you can't actively.
So in other words, they always stay as a group in that cordoned off area. whether
Yes.
In the hotel, the
Yeah.
Santa Martha Hotel or Sistine Chapel or
Or the Apostolic Palace. Yeah. Yeah. So that's where.
enough rooms that they could, it'd be like our fireside room.
Yeah. Plus, I'm sure if they want to, within limits, if you've ever kind of seen pictures of the Vatican, behind St. Peter's, they're what are called the Vatican Gardens. I'm sure they allowed the cardinals to go and to take a walk if they want, or to walk and pray, or to walk and talk together if they want. Yes, Cynthia.
Do they have a lot of masses going on, or just one altogether?
I believe it's Mass every day. I believe.
Together.
Yeah, they're all together. They all stay together. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So, if the cardinals wish on the first day, they may take one vote that afternoon. They don't have to, but most of the time they do. I've read that a lot of cardinals will take this first vote as an opportunity to vote their heart. So, if I got my 100%, I would like to have John Lang be Pope, right? So I'm going to vote for him, right? And then after that, God help the church, after that, in subsequent rounds of voting, then they will start to sort of pay attention to not only who do I think is a great candidate, but also who do I think can actually win this election, right? They'll start to pay attention to that, okay? So that's kind of how that sort of works. Interestingly, outside the chapel, where there are discussions going on and there is a little bit of politicking going on, there can't be any decisions made that are binding on the new pope, right? So, you can kind of, tell whoever, Rose, if you are elected pope, I need you to do this or enact this policy. But once you become pope, that's not binding on you. There's nothing that can be put in place that's binding on the new pope, okay? So they're really careful about that, okay? Questions? Yeah.
Do they do Mass in Latin, or how do they communicate? Because with everybody being so international,
Yeah.
languages must be.
That's a great question. I would guess most of the masses are probably in Latin, but Italian is used a lot as well in the Vatican. That's almost sort of the lingua franca of the Vatican is Italian. So, and a lot of the cardinals have studied in Rome. Yeah. So they most of them know Italian, at least enough to understand. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So for the actual election itself. Again, you'll hear all the kind of concerns and cares around, trying to make sure there is no fraud or no funny business. So before a vote is taken, they choose 3 cardinals by lot. So they're chosen by lot. And they are chosen to act as scrutineers, right? So they are sort of the overseers or vote counters, okay? And And then they also choose 3 revisers. They're called revisers. Their job is to check the work of the scrutineers and make sure that they are being honest, that their work is accurate, et cetera, okay? So what happens is, when it's time to vote, the cardinals have little slips of paper at their place, okay? They are asked to write down the name of their preferred candidate, okay? Interestingly, they're asked to disguise their handwriting if they can. Today, I'm not sure that makes much of a difference. I think I asked Teresa's uncle that once, and he said, well, I just wrote with my left hand. But it has to be legible, but you're asked to, if you can, to disguise it. Then you fold it twice. And then when it's your turn, what you do is you proceed up to the altar. And on the altar, there are receptacles. I don't know if you can see this very well here, okay? But there are 3 receptacles. I'm not sure what this little one is for. I think that's for the notes of the scrutineers. But there are 3 receptacles. You can see this is a little paten, kind of a little dish, kind of like what we would use for communion, okay? So you proceed up. You place your ballot into the paten. You kneel down. You place your ballot into the paten, and you say, how's it go? What's the formula you use? It's something to the effect of, I swear before God that the person I have chosen, I believe to be the best candidate for Supreme Pontiff of the Catholic Church, right? There's a formula that goes something like that. It's in here somewhere. I just can't remember the exact words. There it is.
My judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected.
There you go. So 7C, that's the formula they use. Then they place their vote, their ballot, onto the little paten there. Then they pick up the paten, and they use the paten to dump the ballot, into this larger kind of receptacle, okay? So again, they're very carefully trying to make sure that nobody sticks 2 ballots into one or anything like that, right? So they're very, very careful with that. Once all the cardinals have voted, the first thing the scrutineers do is they count the ballots. If there are more ballots or less ballots than there are cardinals, they don't even look at who's been voted for. Right away, they burn those ballots, and then they have to vote again. Okay, so the number of ballots must equal exactly the number of cardinal electors. Yeah, Hillary. Mm-hmm. Yes. So they do that. That actually was accurate. So what happens is, if the number of ballots equals the number of cardinals, then they proceed to start counting the votes. So what happens is, the first scrutineer, he mixes up the ballots, then he'll choose one, he'll read the name to himself, and he'll write down the name, and then he passes it to the second scrutineer. The second scrutineer does the same thing. He reads the name, and he writes it down, okay? Then he passes it to the third scrutineer. The third scrutineer reads the name and then reads it aloud so all the cardinals can hear. And then he has a needle with a red thread attached, and then he pierces the ballot and basically threads it onto this thread he has, okay? And they do that for all of the ballots, okay? Once they've counted all the ballots, then what happens is he ties off both ends of the thread, and he places it in this second receptacle, okay? And then what happens, actually I lied. No, I'm right, sorry. Then what they do, the scrutineers, then they go through and they actually tally the votes to see how many votes each candidate got, okay? If one person did not receive 2/3 of the votes, then what they do is they burn the ballots. The election is inconclusive. There's a special stove that they set up in the Sistine Chapel. They add certain chemicals to the ballots that makes the smoke come up black, okay? So you may have, I know many of you are familiar with that. You can see that's an example of black smoke, okay? If 2/3 of the electors vote for the same person, that person has just been elected Pope, okay? So at that point, what happens is what we talked about. The senior-most cardinal or cardinal bishop, or usually it's the dean, will approach the person who's just been elected and say, do you accept your canonical election? And he can say yes or no, okay? Almost always they would say yes. If he says yes, then right away, he becomes pope. At that moment, he becomes pope. If there were a case today where you had a cardinal, and there's nothing in canon law which says you couldn't have this exactly, but if you had somebody who was not already a bishop for some reason, so for example, priests can be appointed cardinals, although usually if that happens, they're over 80 and they're too old to vote anyway. It's kind of an honor that's given to them. But what would happen if somebody is elected who is not already a bishop, there is a way to sort of ordain him a bishop. Once he becomes bishop, then he automatically becomes pope as well. Okay? And at that point, what they do is they take the ballots, they add them to the stove, and this time they add different chemicals, and then the smoke comes up white, like that, right there. And that's how the world knows that we've had a successful election. They started doing something in the past 2 elections, which I think they'll probably continue. They start ringing the bells in all the papal basilicas. That kind of clues the people in the city of Rome and the media and whatnot that, hey, we've elected a pope. Okay? Yeah.
Is there a segment of time from when they announce who it is till they actually, or they just become pope right then and there?
They become pope right then and there. There's an actual consecration that will happen, a week or 2 later when the pope takes possession of his cathedral, which interestingly, the pope's official cathedral is not St. Peter's. That is the Vatican Basilica, and that's probably where the pope does mass most often. But his actual cathedral as Bishop of Rome is the Lateran, St. John Lateran. It's one of the other 4 major papal basilicas in Rome. And once he goes and it's called taking possession of his cathedral, that's when officially things are concluded. But he's pope right away. He's pope right away. Yeah.
How many times can they vote a day? In the movie, they said twice, but can they do 5 votes?
They can vote twice in the morning, and they can vote twice in the afternoon. Yeah, that's the limit. So 4 times a day. And actually, it gets quite complicated. If they go on for, I believe it's 3 days, and they can't come to a decision, they can pause for a day. And usually they'll have somebody stand up and give a little fervorino to try and encourage them to make a decision here and kind of get busy with their responsibility. Then it can go on for several, I think it's 3 more days. It's maybe 6 or 7 other rounds of voting. And then the same thing can happen. They'll take a vote. At a certain point, it's interesting because John Paul changed this. At a certain point, if they could not come to a decision, this has never happened in the modern period, then the vote could be decided by a simple majority. Now, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that, do you think? If you have a faction that has a simple majority, but they can't get to 2/3, all they have to do is wait it out, right? And they'll get their candidate eventually, right? All they have to do is wait it out. So that's why Pope Benedict went back and changed that rule. He basically overturned what John Paul had kind of put in place. And Benedict went back to, it's got to be 2/3 no matter what. You have to get to 2/3, okay? So if we have 130, I think it's 2/3, or if it's not, the number is not divisible by 3, I think it's actually 2/3 plus 1. Yeah, so 133 is not divisible by 3, so it would be 133 divided by 3, you would get what, 3, 1, 3, 45, so 46.
Well, that's 1/3.
Yeah, 45 is 1/3, so 9, is it 91? It'd be 2/3 plus 1. 133 times 0.667.
So 88?
So 88, so 89, probably 89.
88 or 89?
Yeah, so it's either 88 or 89 votes this time. Yeah, Rose?
Everybody puts their vote in, and then the 3rd person reads it out loud.
Right.
Okay, and so at that point, like the first day or the first whatever, there might be 10 people who get it.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
Once those 10 people are right, can it only stay those 10 people, or can it
Nope, they can flip their vote to somebody completely different if they want to.
completely different?
Yeah.
And then, so it never gets to where you only have 2 people or 3 people.
They start to see who has legs and who doesn't. So they start to get a sense of who has the possibility of being elected and who may not. So they get a sense for that, but there's nothing binding. If you've got 2 that are just splitting the vote down the middle and they just cannot get either side to move, they can propose a third candidate, kind of a compromise candidate. They can do that. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, come in.
I have a question.
Sure.
I've never understood why they ask the Pope, the new Pope,
Uh-huh.
to choose a name.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's not changing the name, taking a new name.
Yeah, so the question is, why does the Pope choose a new name? So that goes all the way back to the early centuries when in the Roman Empire, frequently you had converts to the faith who were in the position of priests or bishop, right? And frequently they would have pagan names. So I think the first Pope to change his name, his given name was Mercury. And it was thought to be not appropriate to have the Pope bear the name of a pagan god, right? So he changed his name, and I don't remember what name he chose. But that was the beginning of popes choosing their names, their papal names. That's a really good question. Yeah, Susan.
Okay, so you said they could vote twice in the morning and twice in the afternoon.
Yes.
But what if as they're counting the papers, they don't match,
Uh-huh.
they have to burn them all? Does that count as one of the
No.
times, or do they, okay.
Yeah, that does not count. That does not count. There can be two, legal or valid votes in the morning and two valid votes in the afternoon. Yeah, yeah.
Has there ever been a time where the first vote, somebody was elected?
They can do that. There is provision for that. You can have a pope elected by unanimous acclaim on the first round. Yes, you can do that. I don't know if that's ever happened. That's a great question. But there is provision for that, yes. Yeah. Somebody else, I thought I saw another hand. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I thought the Pope's selecting a name, I always thought that came from Jesus because Simon Peter, so he was Simon.
Sure.
You are Peter, upon you I built this rock. So like him changing his name to Peter, I always associated it with that.
Yeah,
So
originally anyway, it was more connected with the idea of, just not wanting to kind of have a pope who had the name of a pagan god. Yeah. So it takes a little bit of time from the time the pope is elected until we actually get to see him. So among other things, what happens is all the cardinals, once he has accepted, all the cardinals come forward and they kneel down before him and they make an act of kind of homage and promise obedience to him, okay? And then what happens is they whisk him off and they take him into, I mentioned this in my homily too, this little room off the Sistine. It's called the Room of Tears. So they have several sets of papal garments because they don't know how big or small or tall or short the new pope might be. So they find the one that works the best and they change him into his white garments. And then the senior cardinal deacon appears on the loggia of St. Peter's, and he has those famous words, brothers and sisters, habemus papam. Right, we have a pope. And then he'll announce who it is. And if you'll listen, he'll mention the actual name of the pope, and usually it's in Italian, or it may be Latin that they actually do it in. But, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, right, who is chosen to be, the name of Benedict, I think is how it translates, for example. Okay? And that's it. Yeah. It's papam, yeah, papam. Papam is the objective case of in the Latin, if I remember my Latin correctly. It might be papam. Kelsey might have she may have mistyped that. Yeah, but it just definitely ends in an M. I just don't remember if it's EM or AM. Yeah. Yeah, and so, is it AM? So it should be papam. Yeah, not papem, papem. It should be papam. Yeah, so just a typo there. Okay.
Chooses his name as soon as he accepts.
Yeah, he chooses his name as soon as he accepts. There's some traditions around the choosing of a name. So it's kind of sort of informally understood that no pope chooses the name Peter out of respect and reverence for the first pope. It was also understood until Francis that you don't choose the name Francis because Francis, just out of respect for his humility and whatnot, so people didn't choose the name Francis. Pope Francis had a very definite reason for why he wanted Francis, so it made sense. Yeah, they're very careful with that. No, so traditionally you wouldn't choose the name Francis either, but Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, when he was elected, he very much, one of the famous things he said is, I want a poor church for the poor. And he was really big on this, the idea of, the church needs to accompany those on the margins, the poor, the forgotten, the lost, as did St. Francis. And so that's why he chose that name. But traditionally, that was one of the names that cardinals would not choose. Get out of respect, reverence.
We have a Franciscan congregation.
Mm-hmm.
If you choose the name of the leader or the founder of a congregation,
Yes.
that may be what they say you are, I would say in English, you're part, you're the judge and part.
Yeah, there's just, it's again, I think it's one of those reverence things for, those who've gone before, so. Your question was just if you're part of a religious congregation, for example, you might be reluctant to choose the name, your religious name, as the name of the founder. So if you're a Dominican, you may or may not choose Dominic, or just, yeah.
There's been a lot of
Luke's and Mark's
Uh-huh.
chosen as names, not as, or excuse me, there's been lots of Johns and Marks, not as many Luke's and Matthews.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
And I remember that specifically too, the Dan Brown, Tom Hanks movie, and Angels and Demons.
Yes,
where they kind of-
very reliable.
But the elected pope at the end of that one chooses the name Luke.
Yeah.
And at the time, there had never been a pope Luke before. And so I always wonder that why, they're all four of the Gospels, so obviously very well known and respected names. So we have lots of John and Marks. Why not so many Lukes and Matthews?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. That's a really good question. So why not any Lukes or Matthews, Pope Luke or Pope Matthew? I don't know. That's a good question. If you want to have a little fun with Catholic trivia, St. Malachi, his prophecies about the popes, he says in his prophecies, which there's a lot of skepticism about them, about their validity, but the last pope will be named Peter, Peter the Roman. Cardinal Pizzaballa, his first name is Pierre Baptiste, which I believe is Peter Baptist. I believe that's how it translates. And he has strong Roman connections. So there you go. So if he's elected, you guys, the end is upon us. Go to confession and say your prayers. Just saying. Let me say one thing, and then I will be happy to stay and take other questions and discuss further. But I know some of you have to go. You have other commitments or need to eat dinner. Please, if you need to go, don't feel shy or self-conscious. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's really fun to talk with you guys. Those of you who'd like to stay and talk a little bit longer, I'm happy to stay a little bit longer. Okay. Yeah, Hillary, go. Tell your joke.
What happens when a pope dies?
What happens when a pope dies? Oh.
You gotta tell the full.
Wait, say it again, Hillary. Another one popes up. All right, what happens when a pope dies? Another one popes up. Thanks, you guys.